Joining us now, a guy I kind of like his name, J.D Gordon, former spokesman for the Defense Department, checking in from Newsmax, Washington. So, J.D., let me get this straight. Last week, those horrible terror attacks in Paris, threats against our nation from the terrorists. Is this really a good time to be opening the gates at Gitmo?
J.D., it's a terrible time. But President Obama has been on this mission to close Guantanamo regardless of the circumstances. You know, J.D., over the years, the international left has basically portrayed these Gitmo detainees as today's Che Guevaras. Che Guevara just standing up to the man, standing up for the little guy. That's how President Obama and the international left view these guys. That's why they let him out. Even though President Obama knows that nearly 1 out of 3 have gone back to terrorism, he's releasing them anyway, despite what happened in Paris. That is horrible. The American people ought to hold him accountable.
J.D., General Jack Keane had this to say about the closure. We want you to listen to it and get your reaction.
When you get down to these last 127 at Gitmo, these are the hardcore and they're also the leaders, so their impact would be considerably greater. And it's an outrage for our troops who are engaged in this fight, you know, against radical Islam to have to fight these people again.
So do you agree? Is this a slap in the face to our men and women serving in uniform?
Absolutely. I agree with General Keane on that. I mean, we've had such a hard time to get these guys in the first place. We've had so many of our troops killed trying to arrest these guys, trying to detain them. And yet President Obama is just letting them go. It's a fact that we're going to lose more Americans because of all these Guantanamo detainees that President Obama is letting go. He's released about half of them. When he came into office in 2009, we had over 240. Now it's just over 120. The 5 guys he just released just now, 4 to Oman and 1 to Estonia, these guys were frontline fighters in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. They were at Tora Bora with bin Laden. One of them was a bodyguard for bin Laden. But those are the type of people that President Obama is letting go.
Well, and we get news of these releases today just as we find out that another former Gitmo inmate is back among the jihadists. He's actually become a recruiter for ISIS in Afghanistan. That has happened often, and to be fair, it happened under the Bush administration as well when there were releases. But why this insistence, seeing the recidivism rate from the jihadists who are released from Gitmo?
The only way it makes sense, J.D., is if you look at it from the international left's perspective. The international left has built these guys up to be the victims of the Bush administration's overreach, they called it. They view these guys as Che Guevara. That's why a lot of the people on the left say, oh, you have to release the Guantanamo detainees or try them. Well, look, did we try all the Nazis in court during World War II? No, we didn't. It's just a false construct. President Obama is acting on his ideology. He's basically a member of the international left. He thinks the Guantanamo detainees are the victims here. That's why he's releasing them. And he knows more Americans are going to die because of it. That's the thing that's so horrific about this, J.D. He knows, and his top advisors know it. You know, there were 9 top lawyers representing al-Qaeda detainees. Those guys got senior appointments in the Justice Department. It was basically like the inmates running the asylum. I was a Pentagon spokesman. I had to deal with some of these people that represented Guantanamo detainees. I'll tell you one, Jennifer Daskal from Human Rights Watch, for instance. She was with me at Guantanamo many times. I've been to Guantanamo over 30 times as a Pentagon spokesman, bringing media down, bringing human rights groups down. Well, Jennifer, she was squarely focused on closing Guantanamo and releasing as many as she could from Human Rights Watch. Well, guess what? She became a senior Obama political appointee, put on the task force to determine who's going to be released. It was like the inmates running the asylum. It's no surprise that Obama is releasing them all and his far-left ideologues along with him.
Well, J.D., you spent time at the Pentagon and at Gitmo, and you are willing to name names and point out the consequences, indeed some would say the follies of these actions. Tell you what, J.D., we want you to hang in there, not only because I like your name, but also because you have some very worthwhile comments based on hard-won experience. You stay with us as well, because we're going to come back after the break and talk more with J.D. Gordon about the rise of ISIS and the curious actions and/or inactions of the current administration. Stay tuned. J.D. Gordon, former Defense Department spokesman. So We heard Senator Rubio outline that in fairly detailed language. Bottom line, how do we stop potential terrorist activity online, J.D.?
J.D., there's two principal ways that I see. The first is that law enforcement and our intelligence authorities need all the tools they can to stop this from the get-go. So that's actually been weakened under President Obama. He's gone after the CIA. He's stopped their coercive interrogations. He's restricted our own law enforcement agencies from the type of surveillance they can conduct. That's got to change. I don't know if we're going to be able to change it during his term, but in 2016 we've got to change it. So law enforcement, intel authorities need all the tools. That's number one. And number two, J.D., we've got to stop this radical Islamist ideology. You know, the West has defended itself against anarchism, Nazism, communism. The battle of our day is against radical Islam. We've got to identify it and go after it. We've got to pressure Saudi Arabia and Iran to stop exporting this toxic ideology, starting with rewriting their textbooks for kids, starting with changing their blasphemy laws, and putting real pressure on their regimes. We're not doing it. You know, at the palace in Riyadh, it's just another day at the office, essentially, every day.
J.D., we've been hearing a lot of talk about lone wolves lately, and earlier this week we had former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz on America's Forum, and he said that he actually believes that these attacks illustrate a collaboration, if you will, between radical Islamist groups. Do you agree with his assessment?
Yes, I do. I think that anytime you have similar like-minded people out there that want to damage the United States and damage the West, they're going to pal up together on social media. So even though there may not be operational links as far as exchanging money or data, there's certainly that ideological link that they help communicate together. So I wouldn't even say they're lone wolves out there. I'd say they're part of a wolf pack. They may be attacking or biting someone on a given day by themselves, but I wouldn't really call them lone wolves. They're all part of this pack mentality that's trying to kill us.
Well, just a friendly amendment. As a proud NC State grad, Wolfpack is our mascot, so let's just call them lone rats.
There you
or
go.
a rat pack, with apologies
Fair
to
enough.
Dean
Okay.
and Sammy and Joe. All kidding aside, we had the arrest yesterday outside Cincinnati. The young man, 20 years old, apparently radicalized online. He had an Islamic pseudonym. Do you believe the takedown of this guy yesterday by the FBI is proof positive that our law enforcement domestically is paying close attention to what's happening on the internet with Islamic radicalization?
Yeah, J.D., you know, they're paying as much attention as they possibly can. It's just that their hands are tied more than they were during the Bush administration. So, yeah, they're still doing a great job, but our law enforcement and intelligence authorities have to be right every single time. A terrorist just has to be right once. And Obama has been tying their hands from the FBI and the CIA on down. So that's dangerous.
It seems like a lot of these groups are strengthening in numbers since 9/11, especially since after we took out Osama bin Laden. What do you think is contributing to this increase?
Well, I think the fact that Islam is a powerful motivating force for them, and this radicalism spreads on the internet, it's a way to stand up to the man, if you will. I mean, look, there are crazy ideologues that have been trying to kill Western society, trying to kill Americans since we've existed. If you look at 1901, Leon Soglos, he was an anarchist. Well, he assassinated President McKinley. Lee Harvey Oswald, if he was alive today, he wouldn't be a communist, he'd be a radical Islamist. So I think radical Islam is a much more powerful force. There's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. The Quran's a very powerful instrument. It's a much more powerful ideological motivator than communism, Nazism, and anarchism everywhere. So I think that's why so many people are gravitating towards it. And the fact that President Obama can't even name that it's radical Islam, that's dangerous.
But JD, don't you think it's fair that we clarify? We say 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. We're talking about a select few. The vast majority of Muslims are not violent like the people that you've been describing.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's correct. Here's the thing, though communism and Nazism, anarchism, the other radical ideologies that were trying to kill the United States were less powerful. This radical Islam basically has hijacked a religion, if you will, a religion that's 1.6 billion. So even though, of course, most Muslims aren't violent, of course they're not. Of course, most of them just want to live their lives, raise their kids, have a good life, of course. However, that radical Islam is much more powerful than communism, Nazism, and anarchism ever were.
Fair enough. J.D., we really appreciate your time. J.D. Gordon, former Pentagon spokesman, joining us there from Newsmax, Washington. When we come back, we'll have a chance to visit with a man who's a human rights worker, filmmaker, and author. His name, Jason Scott Jones. He shows up next here on America's Forum.